The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, this is Fred Iantorno, Executive Director of CIECA. I wanted to welcome you to our first CIECAcast of 2013, entitled Inside the CIECA Committees. Today, Charlie Court and I will discuss the CIECA committee structure and an overview of what each committee does. In future CIECAcasts, we will go into depth on a specific committee as their milestones are reached. Thank you for joining us today. Because we're in this webinar instead of a go-to-meeting type of arrangement, if you have questions, please type them in. We'll get them and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Again, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be using a term today that all right, I'm trying to get my thing to advance. Okay, we're going to use a term today, the SAB. Some of you are very familiar with it, but it stands for Standards Advisory Board. Organizationally, all of the CIECA standards setting committees report to the SAB. The architecture, Charlie will get into all of these later on, CSI, scheduling, glass, VDI, with PDR, subrogation, parts and material. You can see this, they all report up to the SAB. The SAB's relationship to the board, the chair of the SAB is the vice chair of the board. He reports to the board, he or she reports to the board, and also the executive committees. Now, the chairs of each of the committees are volunteer CIECA members, usually one from the business side and one from the technical side. Pardon me. All right. The SAB's role, they actually coordinate all the cross-committee developments. They review and approve the tactical plan changes. They ensure the due process and consensus has been made and is responsible basically for the whole tactical plan which is set up by the committees. Now I'm going to turn it over to Charlie Court, who will walk through each of the committees. And hang on while I change the I'll give you, Charlie, you have the keyboard control.
Fred, I don't see how to, let me just back up. There we go. Okay, I've got it now. Hopefully it'll work. Welcome everybody. This is Charlie Court, and before I go into any specific committee, I want to just talk about some of the things that they have. Everyone develops messages, code lists, and their implementation guides. We've really focused on through all the committee, and not specifically the architecture, on how to get it implemented. Most people develop standards and focus on developing the standard versus focusing on developing the implementation of that standard. So that's been our focus of the whole thing. We have two basic documents we come up with. One is the implementation guide, which includes a business focus, which includes the mission of the committee, the business plan, and the workflow, and the definition of all the messages and any related definitions. Then we have the technical side, which we call Appendix C, and what that does is that goes through and identifies all of the VMS elements which you will use in the implementation, as well as the schema representation. So that's basically what we do in all the committees. Not mentioning in all the committees, I'm going to cover it overall. All of the messages now can be hosted on web services, not just asynchronously, but synchronously now as we move through the process. So I thought I'd pass it all on to you. Thanks, Fred. Moving right on to the Architecture Committee. Basically what the Architecture Committee does is that they're empowered to establish rules and take responsibility for the development of technical and architecture aspects of the CIECA standards. Basically they report to the SAB, but they are the technical arm of the SAB. As Fred mentioned earlier, they're both business people and technical people, and they are both responsible for evaluating the new, oops. Fred, I'll just have you advance. I'm not getting
Okay.
Great. Back up, please. Basically, they develop rules for the guidelines for standard development. They have rules are rules, and they're found in the BMS itself, the Business Message Specification. Guidelines are another document that says here's how it's the best way to do it. Not written in stone, but the best way to do it. So we have both types of documents sitting out there. Researching new technologies, web services, for example, we came out and said here's how to develop messages and implement messages in a web service mode. So we actually have a document to that. We are really focused on the development process and to ensure consensus between all committees. Fred just used the term consensus, but what we really focus on is we don't really care if we have a majority. We want everybody to understand this is the way we're going to do it. We believe that that works best as we develop these new standards. We liaison with other organizations. CIECA was actually started with, based on another organization. Mostly we've been related to the ARA, which is American Recyclers Association, and then also to the OTA, the Open Travel Alliance, as well as STAR, then who develops manufacturers for OEs. We ensure standards quality. We have 2 releases per year. We get into 2.5 days where we go through the BMS, the code list, and the schema, and we have sometimes an emotional exchange of information. Was one time one of the co-chairs of architecture was arguing with the other co-chair of architecture, and she says, if you don't be quiet, I'm going to strangle you with this mouse cord. So and humor, but it was really how much we really believe in our standards that we develop. Again, we develop the implementation tools sitting out there, and we develop those tools based on input from all the committees. Fred, why don't you go to the next one?
I think.
Go ahead. I'm in CSI. Yes, Randy Hansen is the chair of CSI. It's a Customer Satisfaction Committee, and they're looking together to streamline operations together for the operations of generating the CSI research request, and then creating an electronic workflow for CSI. There was never a electronic workflow within the CSI organization. They established comparative analysis. What that means is we really need to have standard questions and answers for you to standardize. So that's those 2 bullets go together, really in saying before you can do modeling, you really have to be consistent in your questions and your answers. We have electronic exchange of CSI surveys to be shared out there, and standards that apply to all collision industry disciplines. It's estimate surveys, repair surveys, glass service repair surveys, rental surveys, towing surveys, property surveys. We even have one for custom surveys. So that's what we've been doing there. This currently came out of maintenance mode, developed 2 more, the survey recording message and the survey reporting message, which really talks about the organization of the survey itself, and now they're back in maintenance mode. Would you go to the next one, Fred? We then have an education committee, which also reports to the SAB, Standards Advisory Board, and Captain's headed that up for a while. Basically, we're into both the technical and the business education. Fred mentioned CIECAst that are based on both. He's right there. We are responsible for them, the CIECAst planning and hosting. We work closely with the Architecture Committee in doing that. We are also the Implementation Conference planning and hosting. This is the 4th implementation conference we're planning on hosting. They've all been well received and well attended. We promote CIECA and CIECA standards. We know we promote CIECA standards, but we promote it inside and outside the organization. And that's a large tool in really promoting CIECA. We look at education implementation tool development, and we coordinate the activities with architects as we do that. We are also looking at the standards for how to standardize the documents themselves. As we develop implementation guides, as I mentioned earlier in architecture, we want to make sure that they are developed in a standard format so the person that picks up one implementation guide doesn't have to relearn how to pick up the next one sitting out there. So we've done that. We've even started now standardizing how we present our business workflows for better understanding. When we talk about business workflows, one thing I want to mention, the value of those has been highlighted to us lately. Moving into glass, the glass industry is for both the property glass and the vehicle glass, repair and replacement. So they continue development in their world with the glass assignment, the assignment change, cancellation, reassignments, invoicing and remittance, with the billing to accommodate either an invoice or a statement process. The procurement messages have even been developed with the glass, so we not only have the retailers and the insurance carriers involved, we also have the glass manufacturers. Key in glass was also they highlighted the main role to really talk about the fleets and the organizations like GE that manages their own fleet. So that's one of the things that they actually brought to the table as well. And they have web services applicable. I put that again on, this is the first one we're really talking about that, but that is really what we're driving for out there, is to make these messages in real time. So we will always have them in a batch or asynchronous mode, but now we want to make sure that when our business partners, our members, really want to work, they want to work for really coming out and putting in web services. One thing about Glass too, they are looking to implement the new format for the implementation guide in all their implementation guides, and they're also looking to upgrade their business flows to the new standards. Once that's done, we're going to be evaluating the Glass standards there and go through and then update all the other committees to have to do the same. We move on, Fred, to procurement. Parts and materials procurement. Bob and Paul started this group out to something we hadn't really done within our standards development and prior within CIECA, is really talk about procurement, the electronic procurement of parts and materials between all parties, and to include both OE and non-OE parts. What they've been accomplished in cooperation with the Recycled Parts and Inventory Committee that also does procurement but focused on recycled parts. These messages include the capability for quotes, requests for quotes, requests for part holds, response to that, purchasing orders and supplier confirmation, shipping notices, shipping notice change or cancellation, the invoice, return and merchandise authorization, supplier's reply, the return itself, credit memo communication, and then a myriad of other requests, such as give me all the invoices within this time period, these specific invoices, these invoices for a repair order, give me all the credit memos I've got coming to me, and the delivery status of my parts. Again, they work closely with the Recycled Parts and Inventory Committee as well as with the Repair Order Committee. They also work with the Shared Standards with the STAR, the Standards for Technology and Automotive Retail. Interesting concept there was we work closely with STAR in developing our web services standard that I talked about earlier in architecture. I'll move on to the next one, Fred. The Recycled Parts and Inventory Committee, that we looked at and said, here is what we want to do is we want to focus on recycled parts and non-OE parts. Needs there were very, very different. When we go and we are working with ARA, as they say, they chair this committee. Would you go to the next slide, Fred, please? That really extends the procurement standards itself, so I'm not going to read what all they are again, but it's to use all of them, but they're extending them. One important extension that they made is usually when you deal with an OE, you're dealing with an OE. When you're dealing with a recycled parts vendor, you might be dealing with a broker. So they brought in that new facet within the procurement of parts. They also expanded the variety of parts of which they had. I didn't know they had so many. There's new aftermarket parts, OE parts. There's recycled parts, which are replacement parts harvested from end-of-life vehicles. There's remanufactured parts that are rebuilt, repaired, or refurbished to the original equipment manufacturer specifications. There's reconditioned parts that the same thing happens, but it's not to the OE manufacturer specifications. There's rebuilt parts that are repaired, rebuilt, refurbished using components or a combination of used and new parts. And then there's OE diversified parts, a brand new term for me. Industry terms include these overstocks, overrun, blemish, discount, optional, taken off. You have a new car, you drive it out of the driveway, and you get in an accident. There's not a whole bunch of parts that are sitting on the the distributor's shelf. So they have to actually go to the assembly line and take them off of the cars that are moving through the assembly line, and then diverted parts. So again, we looked at same messages with the really added tweak in there that they deal with brokers, which means you can have multiple providers, something we hadn't really thought about. Also, when we responded to messages and we says we need to move it to another level, as you're going to ask for an OE part, you're going to get back an OE part that's being quoted. When you ask for a recycle part, you might be given 4 or 5 parts in return, said you want this, it's a grade A, this is a grade B, or this is a grade C. So there's a lot of different standards, different parts of the standard that can get augmented. Again, we're working with ARA and our standards integration. Currently with ARA, our integration is such that whenever they develop a standard, we review it first before they approve it, and when we develop a standard that impacts ARA, we give it to them to review and for their input so they can approve it before we'll go through and put it in our standards. We now have the ARA standards, especially our code standards, within our code list. So that's been a big change. ARA was responsible now for bringing in the mechanical parts into our coverage lines. Well, we move to the next one, Fred. The Repair Order Committee, interesting committee because they work with both the Procurement Committee, the Recycle Parts and Inventory Committee, and the Vehicle Damage and Imaging Committee. What they're focused on is what happens within a repair facility or a multiple shop company. So in other words, here's what an organization, they call them MSOs, but here's an organization that owns multiple shops out there. So we looked at all those messages and bring them into one document, which includes the invoice information. We don't have invoicing that comes out of the Repair Orders Committee, but we do have invoice information. We track the repair facility costs that go out, as well as all the estimates that have come in, all the procurement documents that they've gotten in. It also tracks the labor cost. When we say it enables MSO management, it means that we can not only evaluate the different repair facilities based on cost, based on profitability, but we can also do what they call load leveling, which means that if someone has too much work coming through their door, they can move some of that work to a different facility, and that is huge. The other thing what MSO does is then actually manage all of their data and enable to transfer all of their repair orders from one platform to another, making upgrading much easier. It integrates the Procurement and Estimate Message Committee workflow. Some of the needs of the repair order really had to get taken from the estimate, but it wasn't there. So we had to go back to the Estimate Committee and actually had them add data as well as for the procurement side of it. This is by far the largest message because it incorporates so much data into one message. We first developed that message to be just one repair order per message, and now we have the capabilities of having multiple repair orders per one message. Why don't we move on, Fred, please? The Rental Committee was started out to establish the electronic workflow between interested parties in defining data exchange for messages relating to the vehicle rental. Their rentals include, similar to GLASS, the assignment change and cancellation, and reassignment. But they've also expanded it to include several different capabilities within the BMS. Excuse me. They also have rental extensions that can be out there, and a request for extension and the authorization request to be received and responded to with the authorization coming from usually the carriers. They can have extension inquiries to say where is this all in the process. In this whole relationship, we talk about the rental companies and the organizations. One role we also added to this was really the repair facility, because we needed to understand how much, where the repair facility stood in part orders, for example. So it says, okay, when your part gets delayed, that means the cars could be rented for an extension period of time. So we immediately then say, give me authorization for rental extension. The other thing they moved into then was really moved into the vehicle location services by saying, here's where I'm at, please get me to the nearest location for your rental agency, and that can either be by location, which here's my address. It can be by landmark, I'm at the O'Hare Airport, and it can be by actually coordinates. Here's your latitude and here's your longitude, who do you have closer by me? So that's the first organization committee within CIECA that came out with the coordinated information. It's now being used by other committees. Repair status integration, as I just mentioned, was key as you move through that. It was actually interesting. We had the number of lines on an estimate can help us determine the length of time for a rental. So that really sits out there. They are also in a maintenance mode, and they monitor what exists within other organizations. I mentioned the first one they had for the rental location. What we had there, we've now taken that on by other committees and moving it forward, so we make sure we can communicate with the rental group, even though they're in maintenance mode, saying we're making some changes to that part of the standard. Next, we can move into the repair status committee. We talked about the repair status and process committee. We started out with repair status. We said, well, we really need to understand the process within the repair. So we integrate the electronic messages between the repair facility, rental companies, insurance carriers. Rental companies here again was key. It played very much with the rental extension messages I mentioned earlier. It enables the matching of claims, repairs, and rental reservations to make sure we get all on the same page between all organizations. So when we talk about a claim number of the standard, somebody walks in to do an estimate, they may have a claim number, but they might also call for rental reservation, and they might see if it's covered in the policy, but they don't have the right claim number as they make that reservation. This committee joined all those needs and has then a matching of those claims, repairs, and rental reservations. So that's been a big key as we move through it. The synchronous and asynchronous, that was really critical within this group, within this committee, as they move that forward. They can have this to share the status changes, damage information to estimate the repair completion date, to close the repair order, which needed to be done, which wasn't always completed. They also then define the production stages and define then delay information. So you can have a delay notification. Here's what happened. I mentioned in the rental committee's role. I want to apply for an extension because I now have a delay. My paint booth broke down. My parts backed up, etc. So we have a standard list of delays that occur within the organizations, repair facilities, as well as in the production standards that exist. Let me move on to the next one, please, Fred. The Salvage Committee has been meeting, and they have basically, first a tough job there was to identify, do we call them insurance carriers? And we decided to come up with the term salvage providers, which include insurance companies, fleet companies, rental companies. We also came up with another term, salvors, which means auction. And so when we talk about the salvage providers and salvors as we exist within this group, those are the two entities we deal with. So we really would focus on reducing the disposition cycle time. Currently, we take it anywhere from the time we first receive the fact that it is a potential total loss, so we're going to have salvage coming in, to the time then we say it is, here we're going to sell it in the auction block. So what that can be is it can be the assignment, including assignment errors and acceptance. You can have multiple towing issues, confirmation issues, vehicle enhancement recommendations and improvements, multiple title processing messages, hold from the auction messages, communication relating to the bids, counteroffers, and accepted offers, the actual settlement statements, and of course when you deal with salvage you have to deal with abandoned vehicles. So all of that is really taken into account as we talk about salvage. We also have two types of salvage you're going to have in auction. You can also have, this is only for scrap. The term they use is crispy critter. It's burnt from front to back. That's a direct sale because it's going to be scrap metal. You're not going to auction that. We've expanded it with the Vehicle Damage and Imaging Committee and with the Total Loss Committee to say, here, let's define not only vehicles, but let's define boats. And before we just had trucks, and now we actually have equipment. So all of that is now defined within this group. So it's been we've gotten a number of different messages together, and we're always communicating with related committees, related organizations, and the one we deal with within Salvage is ASPA, and that's the American Salvage Pool Association. And we've actually presented at the organization and attracted some members to be part of this Salvage Committee to get their information in. The other one we don't have, we work closely with the Title Committee and saying let's develop title standards for the faster processing of titling messages. So that's what exists within that. I'm going to go to the next one, Fred. Subrogation is an unlikely child for us to have, as we brought in the Subrogation Committee, and Ken from Wilbur & Associates has really chaired that since it was an effort that was started really within X12, which they developed standards as well. They developed standards for the United States, as opposed to CIECA that's really focused on the collision industry. Subrogation role was to meet the needs of multiple business workflows that can be involved in the subrogation process, from simple one-on-one, a demanding party versus a responsible party, versus all the different entities that can exist within the middle of it. From one-to-one resolution, therefore, to saying I'm going to work with a subrogation vendor, to I'm going to work with multiple subrogation vendors, one to do the investigation, one to do the actual subrogation work, and then finally one that's a collection agency. So that exists out there. It was the toughest role in the subrogation process was really, second toughest was the workflow. First toughest was really define all the parties. Who is the demanding party and who is the responsible party? We finally came up with a resolution that we can argue it will be the carriers that will exchange the information, but it's really that insured that is really the demanding party or the responsible party, because they're the one that has the injury, that has the loss. Because they have an insurance company, that's only a benefit to them, because they don't have to, so they don't have to face the financial loss themselves. So that's how salvage vendors and investigative vendors come into play, and finally the collection and legal vendors come in there. It's from the demand status all the way through the negotiations. We can have status messages that exist along within the way. You can have reporting. As you're dealing with reporting, you can deal with multiple case reporting as they move back to the carriers in this case. They so give me all of the subrogation cases you're handling within this state with this one subrogation vendor, et cetera, all the way down so they can really evaluate where they are at. Where that gets to be critical is in case there's something happening with the subrogation vendor they need to respond to, and more importantly, when it happens within a state that the ruling is going to change within that state, the laws are changing, that they can then respond to that easily and have an idea of what they're really looking at for something they're not handling directly. Subrogation is one of those back of the room type operations, so this has really brought it to the forefront. Let's automate this whole process. So even though the first one says automate the subrogation process, the first one was saying let's define it, because currently it's not automated. And clearly it's not automated right through the binding arbitration. We also have non-binding arbitration that exists in that I forgot to mention. So it's all the supporting efforts that surround that as we move through that. We are looking at right now, our future is really to come up with that demand reply or exchange, we currently call it, arbitration hearing confirmation, all of what happens within the arbitration process with those 4 messages there, and then vendor invoicing and subrogation vendor remittance and how we work through that entire process. So that's where we're at with subrogation. The committee is still very active and still growing as well. Fred, why don't we move to title? Title, interesting, was I'm getting more press from the title committee as thanks to Sandy, Hurricane Sandy that is, there was a lot of, one of our member companies, I won't mention who it is, but one of our member companies rented an airstrip to do nothing but parked total cars on that airstrip. And they were parked there, and the biggest reason they couldn't be sold is because they need to have the title work done. They sat there for months, which is a lot of expense for having something just sitting. So that's what's happening with the title committee. That's kind of, if you look at that magnitude of that problem, we're dealing with carriers and lien holders mainly, but as soon as we get done with the lien holders, then we deal with lien holders dealing with the DMVs saying, please remove my lien. Then the DMVs finally work with the salvers, then the title's there, then the salvage work with the salvage provider to actually bring it to conclusion. Title, obviously, with this being said, has worked very closely with the Salvage Committee and actually somewhat with the Total Loss Committee as well. It's the inclusion of the insureds process. We said we really need to have an insureds there. Basically, we're looking at a electronic document process to where we can have the power of attorney being viewed. We're dealing with multiple states that exist out there. There's something called electronic title states, title holding states, non-holding states. So we all have different workflows as we relate to each one of those states. So it gets to be a challenge as we move through this process for all the different entities, first of all, and second of all the different processes of which we need to go through based on where that title is held, which does not necessarily mean where that vehicle is. The critical focus of what we have, when I say what's the mission of this title group, it really goes back to what you heard about within the other committees. It's a reduction of cycle time. We need to get this thing sold. So when you talk about salvage, that's what they did, is let's reduce the cycle time so I can actually sell this vehicle and quit experiencing costs, instead being able to actually collect. So the effort doesn't stop until the vehicle is actually sold, and that is the focus of the process. To give you an idea, cycle time for a month, not Hurricane Sandy, that was an exception, it's longer, takes about 3 months. 2 months of that is just for title work. So that'll give you the perspective of how important this committee's role is. And currently we're looking to work with lien holders, somebody new within our CIECA scope, and that is really the biggest future we have, is really expanding this to get lien holder buy-in first of all, and then move it to the DMVs. So the carriers and lien holders are the biggest ones just sitting out there, and we actually have a reduced, simplified workflow thanks to architecture and glass and education of what they've done to really simplify it. So we have multiple workflows. We have lien holders and DMVs, salvage and salvage providers, and so those, I think I mentioned carriers and lien holders, but with those 4 workflows, we're saying now that's easy to understand, easy to target then 2 different trading partners versus trying to merge this all into 4. Fred, why don't we move on? Total Loss Committee, when you have an accident, you first of all have an estimate. If you go to the Vehicle Damage and Imaging Committee, they will give you an estimate, but that estimate will be how much it is to repair the car, and by the way, I think this is reaching total loss time. At that point in time, the total loss process comes involved. So the total loss mission is again to help shorten the total loss processing time, to make the process more efficient, and to reduce perceived risks by the facilitating electronic transfer of information between all parties. So that being said, we've had a long process to reduce those perceived fears and getting buy-in as we move through this whole process. The messages include the valuation request and valuation report messages. They can include evaluation inquiry and status messages, evaluation request for information, and evaluation cancellation message. There's a myriad. We talk about recycled parts. How many different parts are there that are non-OE? Same with when you talk about how many valuations are there. Do you want an ACV valuation? Do you want a salvage valuation? Red book, blue book, black book, combination therein? Oh, by the way, it's required by the state to do this specific combination. So you can have multiple different valuations being requested for the same vehicle. So you need to really track the valuations for that vehicle as they move through this whole process. It uses estimate data as a basis, something they call a VIR, Vehicle Inspection Report, that really sits out there and says, okay, here's some estimate data. Let me use that to help me the total loss process. So why do you need estimate data? Come on, Charlie. You need estimate data because you want to say, hey, is this a salvageable vehicle, and how much am I going to get for my salvage value, which comes into my valuation process. So the whole thing is, again, we're wrapped up into multiple different committee involvement as we develop the total losses role with the title committee, with the salvage committee, with the vehicle damage and imaging committee, and we expanded it again, working with all those committees to really encompass vehicles, boats, our specialty vehicles, and equipment. So that's what we've done here. Again, this can all be web services applications for all or part of them. Let's move to the next one. The last one is our first one. So first committee we ever had was a Vehicle Damage and Imaging Committee, which has since expanded to include the paintless dent repair. At one time we had them being two different meetings, even though they were the same city, because the PDR, as it's affectionately called, paintless dent repair, had such a need out there that we said we're still doing a lot of work in the vehicle damage and imaging, but we need to really focus on paintless dent repair. And so that's where we had two different meetings happening, even though they were the same committee. So we're looking at that. Really, we're trying to maintain the standard data exchange. It was the Vehicle Damage and Imaging Committee that came up with the frustration in implementing standards, that they said, if you're going to do it all, do it this way. So when you look at the implementation guide Appendix C, that technical document, it starts out with, do it the same way we told you to do it. Don't do workarounds. So we wanted, they were really the biggest one to really promote the Appendix C development of the schema representations. So they said, do it this way and one way only for the industry, which then really gets into reducing costs for the entire industry. So it's from the assignment to the estimate, we move into it. When you talk about an estimate, you're also talking about many supplements that can exist thereafter. Discovery damage after the estimate. What is an estimate? Well, we need to have actually 3 estimates written. One is for the damage that happened to the vehicle due to the accident. One is for the estimate of what it was before the accident happened, and one was for incidental damage. This insurance carrier is going to pay for this damage, but after the car got in an accident, somebody else hit them because they didn't put on their brakes. That's a different accident. So you can have multiple estimates written for the same vehicle, and each one needs to be then evaluated compared to each other to say, what are you really responsible for? The repair facility doesn't care. It says, I just need to fix the car. So they look at it with a different mode all over. So it's from a vehicle damage assignment. Again, going back, just what we had in rental and glass, the assignment change, assignment cancellations, and reassignment messages. And again, the supplements are a big critical component in here. We actually added one thing with total loss into the estimate process, and that is we wanted to have them indicate if a total estimate was written or if it was just written up to the point where it was total loss. Critical there was what they can get for salvage value. Again, Salvage Committee came into that as well. Supplement tracking was very big in that. We moved forward. This committee was started before it was really an easy exchange of images. So image augmentation, and the way we implemented there was 2 different ways. One was in the message, and one was by the image itself, and largely because messages were too large back in those days for systems to handle. So when you look at vehicle imaging, why was that critical? It's just a piece of data, and all the different committees use imaging, but right now it was critical in ours to say, let's develop standards for imaging, so I can say, here's an image, and this is a photo, this is a PDF, it's a Word document, it's an Excel document, what actually is this? So that is what they've developed within their images. The estimate appraisals, images and invoices, we do have an invoice process within the Vehicle Damage and Imaging Committee as well. And we really enhance the salvage electronic auctions by this additional data I spoke of, by saying, let's try to get this all the way through the process, because even though the estimator says my job is done now, I really would like you to take it to another degree so the whole process can work faster, and actually for the carrier, so they can get more money out of their damaged vehicle. So they work with the Total Loss Committee, the Salvage Committee, Repair Order, Repair Status, and the Rental Committee. So they're all over the board. And Fred, why don't we move to the next one? And what we're looking at doing is, in addition to, if you're going to do it at all, do it this way, the other mantra that all the committees have is don't implement a workaround. Bring your business needs to CIECA. Don't implement a workaround. Because don't add codes that should be standard codes. Don't work along the process and add something, and XML means I can extend it. You can extend it to test it, but then please bring that into CIECA and say, here's the new business needs we'd like you to consider. We ask you to participate in the committee work. You start out first meeting, it's like, what are they really doing here? By the third meeting, you're fully engaged. So participation in the committee work is real critical. That's how we get good stories, but that's how we get really involved in a good standard. Use the implementation guides and provide feedback. The reason we were writing the implementation guides is we had the worst feedback in the world at one time, and that was no feedback. It wasn't really being used. So we change it now to where the implementation guide really is a complete document for a business person, and Appendix C is really a complete document for a technical person. And we have sometimes the same information in both documents because it needs to be there for understanding of that party. When we talk about the standards, we're talking about, do you need codes, any additional codes out there? I put first need codes. We've had people who've actually called and said, I'd like these codes, do you have any? No, but let's develop them if there's a need for it out there. So we come up with new code lists based on that one single email. And then any additional codes, you need to augment that as well. We're looking at codes out there. If you look at the code table, we have 147 different code tables. That's a lot. We're now going through and saying, let's define each code in a layman's terms so you can go out there and really understand what that code actually is to do. So if we focus on codes, if it seems like we're hitting it a lot, it is usually the first step in the implementation process is to focus on the codes. Then the second step will be, let's move to the messages. That's what we're focusing on. So with that, I thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions and any thoughts you have, and I mostly look forward to your suggestions as you work with the committees. Thank you.
Charlie, we haven't received any typed-in questions, so we will. We'll just kind of. I'll just kind of do a quick wrap-up. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on the CIECAcast. I want to also remind you that we will have some subsequent CIECAcasts which will focus on a specific committee and the milestones that they have reached. So we want to thank you, and everyone have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you. Thanks for all your prior work.
Yep. Thank you.